Hello everyone, welcome to the Innovation Lab. In this video we are going to do a quick test to compare the performance of this PWM solar charge controller to this MPPT solar charge controller. So we are conducting this test out of curiosity to know what is really the difference between these two charge controllers and the mechanisms that they use, and also how can we justify the price difference. So this MPPT solar charge controller, you can get it from Amazon or maybe eBay for about $10 to $12. Meanwhile, this MPPT solar charge controller will cost you about $80. So now the question is, what is the difference? Why do we have so much price gap between the two solar charge controllers? And that is why we're going to investigate in this video. All right, let's get to it. But before we get to look at the specs and we talk about the test that we're going to do, if you're new to our channel, I would like to mention that we have made a couple videos in the past on this same topic. So, and those videos were inspired by some questions that I received from my friends and subscribers asking if it would be possible to use a cheaper alternative like a DC to DC constant current boost converter to do efficient solar battery charging. And those came from some earlier videos that I made showing how you can use this constant current DC to DC boost converter as a very efficient and also very affordable battery charger. All right, I highly recommend that you check out those videos. I will add them to the description of this video, and I will also add them as links so you can go check them out. All right, my friends, let's get to it. But before we talk about the test that we're going to do, let's go ahead and look at the specs of each solar charge controller, and also to understand what the MPPT versus PWM mean. So for a PWM solar charge controller, PWM stands for pulse width modulation. So a PWM solar charge controller uses PWM control, for those of us who understand it, not to go too deep into that for this video. So it uses PWM control to kind of step down the voltage coming from the solar panel to what the battery requires to charge. So, and that way it kind of takes away that stress from the solar panel, and it tries to optimize the charge that way. Now, to go over the specs of this PWM charge controller, as you can see here, we have a rated voltage of 12 volts or 24 volts. What it means is that this controller can charge a 12 volt battery pack or a 24 volt battery pack. And it has a rated output current of 30 amps, which means it can deliver up to charging current of 30 amps. And it can take in a maximum input voltage from a solar panel of 50 volts. And for the power ratings, at 12 volts, it can deliver up to 390 watts. And at 24 volts, it can deliver up to 780 watts. All right, so this is quite interesting for a unit that costs only $12. The EPEVER charge controller, on the other hand, uses a function known as MPPT, which stands for maximum power points tracking. So this is a more kind of sophisticated software controlled function that allows this charge controller to optimize the power coming from the solar panel without putting a lot of burden on the solar panel. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the specs of this MPPT charge controller. As you can see here, it's also rated for 12 volts or 24 volts, which as we discussed for the PWM controller, it can charge a 12 volt or a 24 volt battery pack. It has an output current rating of 20 amps, which means it can deliver up to 20 amps if your solar panels can provide that. And this unit here is rated for 260 watts at 12 volts and 520 watts at 24 volts. All right, in a nutshell, that's the specs of the EPEVER MPPT solar charge controller. All right, my friends, at this point, now let's talk about the testing that we're going to do. All right, so for the testing, what we are going to do, as we mentioned earlier, will be to compare the performance of the PWM charge controller to that of the MPPT solar charge controller. And the plan for that is that we are going to use two similar battery packs. We call this battery A and battery B, and two similar solar panels. We call it panel A and panel B. So panel A will supply power to the PWM solar charge controller, and we use that power, we'll process it and use it to charge battery A, as we see here. And on the other hand, solar panel B will supply power to the EPEVER MPPT solar charge controller, and again we'll process that power, optimize it, and use it to charge battery B. And we're going to run these two tests simultaneously to keep everything fair. So the very first thing we're going to do is to look at the charging current coming out of the PWM controller and the MPPT charge controller. Then in the end, we are going to look at how much energy did each system store in the battery pack. So overall, what we're testing is the ability of each solar charger to basically or essentially get the power from the solar panel and store it in the battery. So we're going to look at how much energy in watt hours each system was able to accumulate in each of the batteries. And that will kind of tell us which of these charge controllers are more efficient in performing that function. All right, let's get to it. So what we're looking at here will be the setup for testing the solar charge controllers. And the idea here is to use two similar but different solar panels, as you have seen, the ones I have in the backyard. So we're going to use solar panel A to test the PWM charge controller on the left, and we're going to use solar panel B to test the MPPT charge controller on the right. So for each of these, I'm using the same similar 12 volt 30 ampere hour lithium phosphate battery packs that I built, that when I connect both of them, they'll give us 24 volts, but here we're doing a 12 volt test. So now let's take a closer look to kind of look at the charging current. The time I'm making this video is right about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, so not maximum irradiance, but we're getting, a sufficient amount of sunlight to conduct this test and get a reasonable amount of charging current. So for the first system on the left here, we have our PWM charge controller connected to solar panel A, and we're going to use it to attempt to charge, we'll call this battery A. So the problem I found with this charge controller will be that it doesn't show us the charging current. It shows us the charging voltage, battery voltage, then the load voltage. I am not sure what this 24H is, but I don't know how they built this without actually adding the charging current as a displayed parameter. But anyways, in a way to get around that, what I did was to add my digital battery capacity tester just to allow us to get some additional parameters, like it will show us the charging current, and it will show us the power in watts going to the battery, and they will show us the accumulated energy stored in the battery in watt hours. And I understand that adding the battery capacity tester might introduce some efficiency losses on this side of the experiment, which is the PWM side, but that's the best we can do for this test. So let's look at what's really happening here at this instant, and we jump over to the right side with the MPPT charge controller, and we kind of make the comparison. So what we're seeing here, we're seeing a charging voltage of 13.5 volts, a charging current of 3.16 volts, and we're putting in about 42 watts. Overall, we have accumulated about 80 watt hours. All right, so now let's go over to the right side, which has the solar MPPT charge controller, the EPEVER controller, also connected to our 12 volt 30 amp lithium phosphate battery. So let's see what's going on here now. So we're getting a charging voltage of 28 volts coming in from the solar panel, and a battery voltage of 13.8 volts, PV current going in of 2.6 amps, and the charging current of 5.2 amps. So if we look over here real quick, you can see on the PWM charge controller, we're only getting 2.68 amps. And we go over here real quick, you'll see 5.6 amps or 5.5 amps. So showing you that the MPPT charge controller is doing more optimization as expected than the PWM controller is doing. That's pretty much the observation in a nutshell. At the end of the day, I'll show you guys overall accumulated energy in watt hours. So right now, we are seeing 81 watt hours coming from the PWM solar charge controller. And on the MPPT charge controller, let's see what we're getting. So on the MPPT charge controller, it's showing us that we've gotten to 0.2 kilowatt hours, so which means about 200 watt hours. So compare that to the 82 watt hours that we've only received from the PWM charge controller. I think the difference is quite obvious there. All right, so I'm just going to leave the system to charge for a little while, maybe a few hours or maybe until sunset, and we can kind of come back and look at the overall accumulated energy in watt hours. All right, my friends, we are back. So what I did was to leave the systems to charge for a few hours, I believe about 3 to 4 hours. So now let's take a closer look to see what's going on both systems, so and we make the comparison. So for the first system, we're going to look at the PWM solar charge controller. So one thing I noticed was this controller doesn't display the PV voltage. It just shows you the battery level as the battery is charging. And it doesn't actually also show you the charging current, as I mentioned earlier. And that was why I added this digital battery capacity tester. So looking at here, you can see that the battery voltage level is now at 13.3 volts, and we are charging with a charging current of 0.24 amps, and the accumulated energy in the battery right now is at 116 watt hours, which is kind of what we are interested in at this stage. All right, now let's go over to the MPPT charge controller to see what's going on. So this actually shows you the PV voltage. It gives you all the parameters you need. So, but because it's rainy and cloudy outside, the PV voltage level dropped down to about 15 volts. But at this point, we're interested in knowing how much energy we have stored in the battery using this system. So as you can see here, we have stored about 0.2 kilowatt hours, which is equivalent of 200 watt hours. And I know that it exceeds that. The only reason why we are seeing only 0.2 is because the graphical user interface of this can only show you the accumulated energy to the nearest 1 decimal place. So that means you can only see increments of 100 watt hours. So the worst case scenario for this one will be that at least we're getting an accumulated energy of 200 watt hours, and while we're looking at only 116 watt hours for the PWM controller. All right, my friends, we have come to the end of this video. As you have seen in the video, our goal was to perform a test to compare the efficiency of a PWM solar charge controller with an MPPT solar charge controller. And as we have seen during this test, the MPPT solar charge controller, I would say as expected, was more efficient in actually getting the energy from the solar panels and storing it in the battery. During a test period of about 3 to 4 hours, this MPPT solar charge controller was able to accumulate an energy level of 200 watt hours, while the PWM solar charge controller, as you can see here, was only able to accumulate about 119 watt hours. So our test was conducted using similar lithium phosphate battery packs and also similar solar panels to keep some things uniform, so that way we know we can truly compare the performances. Alright my friends, if you like videos like this one, I highly recommend you check out this video that we made to compare the function of a DC to DC boost converter with an MPPT solar charge controller to see if we can use a boost converter as a cheaper alternative. Alright my friends, we have come to the end of this video. If you like videos like this, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. If you would like to see more testing and more projects that we'll be working on in the future, don't forget to subscribe, and also we will appreciate it if you can share our videos to help our channel keep growing and reaching more people. Alright, I will see you guys in the next video.